One of the most difficult things to achieve in fighting games is balance. With so many characters and attributes, creating a cohesive fighter that is immersive, fun, and somewhat fair is a tall order. As most developers cannot get it right the first time, balance updates become a necessity, and with it comes adjustments to the characters. Some lose part of their toolkit or have it reworked in such a way to lower their strength, and others have things added to them to increase their strength. These are called nerfs and buffs, and they just might be the most controversial thing in the FGC. Welcome back to the channel, and today I'd like to talk about some of the most discussed and controversial nerfs in fighting game history. The topic of buffs and nerfs is a difficult one to talk about because people's opinions vary, but this is ours, and if you have a different take, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss any of our videos. If you want more content like this and to keep up with all things FGC, head over to our website at DashFight.com. With all that being said, let's get into the video. Today, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is considered one of the best fighting games ever made, and there are some who would argue that it is the very best. But before UMVC 3, there was just regular MVC 3, which came out in early 2011, following the success of the other games in the franchise. One of the characters that got on people's nerves pretty early was Sentinel. The big body character was a great zoner with strong armor to his launch. Sure enough, as soon as people could, they started to complain about the character, and soon there was a small update made to the game in March 2011 that nerfed his health from 1.3 million points to about 910,000, which was a significant nerf. For many, this was awesome. The scourge of the game was getting his just desserts. But the real worry for many others was the fact that Capcom seemingly caved to fan pressure and changed the character so early in the game. It's natural for a fighting game to come out and everyone complains about that one move or character that no one can overcome and is broken and busted because of it. But then, someone figures something out, the tech spreads, and suddenly the big bad scary character isn't so scary anymore and the game's meta develops. MVC3 wasn't given any time to really develop, and by the time Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom came out, Sentinel was firmly a mid-tier character. He's certainly still dangerous, but his health nerf raised more than a few eyebrows and was the source of many an internet debate. If you say the name Shawn Matsuda to a Street Fighter 6 fan who hasn't been around too long, they'd say, who? And if you mention the name to even someone who has been around since Street Fighter 4, they might be like, oh, Lara's wimpy brother. However, in Street Fighter 3, where Shawn made his debut, and Street Fighter 3 Second Impact, Shawn was a top tier character. His Dragon Punch was a menace with a follow-up which ensured you got better Oki, and his Tatsu was a lot faster. His design was one of the game's high points. But then something happened, and by the time Street Fighter 3 Third Strike came along, Shawn was in the game, but he had been nerfed to death. His projectile and DP now did less damage, and his movement speed was reduced. He was nerfed to oblivion, made to become a joke character of the same level as Dan Hibiki. What made this more controversial was the fact that it was done intentionally. Capcom knew exactly what they were doing, and in an interview, Tomoshi Sadamoto, the producer of the game, explained that Shawn was to be the handicap character. He was the guy that you picked when facing a noob or a scrub. You know, that joke about when someone picks Greece or Southampton in FIFA, meaning you should run for your life? Shawn was that character. It's unclear if Shawn will ever be playable again, but if you've never heard this before, we'll be the first to tell you. Shawn used to be top tier. Depending on where you stand, this nerf was either a godsend or a travesty. What do I think? Well, I think you can overdo some things in a bid to make everyone happy. Was Fakamram jacked? Yes. Was he nerfed to oblivion? Also yes. Fakamram was a new character added to Tekken 7, and his story is tinged with tragedy as his family was abducted, and he's forced to fight for the Thai army to have any hope of seeing them again. When he was introduced in 2020, the Muay Thai fighter was easily one of the best characters in the game following Tekken 7's trend of releasing busted characters, I See You Geese and Leroy. Fakamram was a force of nature, and his rating in the game was perhaps commensurate to his build. But soon enough, the community tired of his busted moves and launchers, and the Nerf hammer was brought down on him pretty hard. He was hit as early as the same year he released, and he lost a lot of his speed along with a few other tools. He was hit again in 2021 when Lydia was released, and his damage and over 10 of his moves were hit with nerfs. Bandai Namco was not done with poor Falk, as they descended on him again last year in August, where a lot of his combo starters and launching moves were taken away and nerfed, and even his lows were on the chopping block. Fakamram went from a top 10 character to low tier, and at this point very few people are even interested in playing him. It is unknown if he would return for Tekken 8, but if the general consensus on the character is anything to be considered, he might not show up again. Pichu's story in Smash is pretty sad. Pichu is a pre-evolved version of Smash darling, Pikachu. The character was introduced in Super Smash Bros. Melee and was so bad it was considered a joke character. Kinda like poor Shawn and Dan in Street Fighter, Pichu is small, which also meant it is a light character that could get knocked around a bit. By the time Super Smash Bros. Ultimate rolled around, Pichu was much more powerful and viable. Its front tilt was considered one of the best in the game, and its speed and power were great attributes that made Pichu a decent pick for anyone. However, the nerf gods came for Pichu, and boy did they do him dirty. The biggest nerf was his hitbox, which was made larger, and this was so bad that Pichu had a larger hitbox than Pikachu, and Pikachu is the bigger character. This was a big deal because while Pichu was made stronger from the Melee days, it was still the lightest character in the game. So with a bigger hitbox, Pichu was suddenly not as tournament viable anymore. They also made Pichu's use of electricity hurt it even more, and again, as the lightest character in the game, this was a big deal as suffering any damage was not a good idea. As mentioned earlier, Pichu's fall from grace was sad. This is because as a low tier in Melee, then getting something of a new lease on life in Ultimate, and then being right back to being low tier again, kind of feels like being a superhero in a dream, and then waking up to the cruel reality of a dead-end job, bills, and no friends. The last nerf we'll talk about is with a recent game. Mortal Kombat 1 came out with a lot of fanfare, and fans were happy at the return of the iconic game. They added a bold new system with cameos who helped the player in their quest to murder the opponent in the most gruesome ways. But soon players noticed that some characters and cameos were a little too strong, especially Cyrax, who was essentially broken. So what happened? You guessed it, Big Daddy Nerfs came to teach all the characters a lesson. Cyrax was hit hard, and that generated a lot of debate. Was this a little too early? Weren't people supposed to get into the game a bit more? Weren't there counter strategies that player could come up with? But interestingly, while Cyrax's nerf was contentious, it wasn't the only one. As one of the most iconic characters in Mortal Kombat, Scorpion also suffered his own nerfs. His damage was reduced, and while this isn't in and of itself an earth-shattering thing, it was made worse by the fact that Scorpion isn't even that good in Mortal Kombat 1. So an iconic character who was already difficult to use was now nerfed, and the problem most people had with it was the idea of nerfing a character that was already lacking. Are nerfs a bad thing? Not necessarily, but they must always be tempered. This might be an obvious point, but games should really be as balanced as possible when they come out. This means developers should be given time to make the best version of the game possible, and when that is done, we are usually rewarded with a better balanced game. Titles such as Skullgirls and Street Fighter 6 are great examples of games that came out looking pretty good because they were developed over an extensive period. But when an issue comes up, as long as it isn't some game-breaking thing, games should be given time to mature. Developers need to trust players more, trust your audience, and their ingenuity. Some will complain, but that's just life. However, for anyone who truly loves the game, they will try and try and try again until a solution is found. This is why fighting games are so unique. They challenge the player to figure it out. It's a cerebral exercise, and fighting games should never shy away from that. Fighting games should also avoid letting the community over-influence decisions, like with the Sentinel nerf, where a vocal group called for nerfs and Capcom acted accordingly without giving things enough time to evolve. Growth is an integral part of fighting games, and newer players should be given tools with which to grow rather than being given advantages that show artificial improvement. For instance, Shawn's nerf was a result of giving stronger players a handicap, but did that come at the expense of the character? Wouldn't it have been better to make Shawn a character that newer players wanted to pick up and with whom they could learn the game before graduating to a more technical character? So, what do you think? Are there even more contentious nerfs that you know about? Leave them in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, you can let us know if you'd like one on the most contentious buffs in history as well. And be sure to check out our website, DashFight.com, to update yourself on all the happenings in the community, tournaments, and news. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.